Welcome from San Diego, California. We are reaching you today in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, live through a unique, complex international telecommunications network via satellite, microwave, and cable. The International Training Center at San Diego State University brings us together once again through this original video conference program, which joins distinguished organizations representing education, business, and government in Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina. We also welcome Spain, the United States of America, the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C., and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, Switzerland. Today, we examine leadership in the new economy, thinking out of the box. This is the fourth video conference of the year 2000 series on new generation knowledge for productivity and global success. My name is Dr. Peter Andersen of the School of Communication here at San Diego State, and I will be moderating today's program. It is my pleasure to moderate this session that examines unconventional ways of thinking, the type of thinking that Edward de Bono describes as lateral thinking. Today, we hope to examine how some great leaders think in unconventional ways. To paraphrase Robert Kennedy, some people see things as they are and ask why. Some people dream things that never were and ask why not. So often, the training of managers, business people, and educators is to follow the traditional path, the tried and true route. True leaders, charismatic leaders, have a different vision, a different order, a new path. These leaders also have an ability to share their vision with others and inculcate in these followers a vision of the possible. Today we are in the midst of several revolutions. First, we are transitioning from an industrial economy to an information economy. An economy where ideas, data, and information will rapidly replace objects as the primary economic commodities. Second, we have entered a global economy where borders are blurred and the nation-state will become less important than alliances, cultures, companies, and regions. While the transition from local to global economies will be painful for many and disorienting for everybody, globalization is inevitable. It began half a millennium ago with the global voyages and continues today with the World Wide Web. Third, networks are replacing communities as the playing field broadens. The network will be the watchword for the next millennium. Friendship networks, business networks, electronic networks, and economic networks. Old ways of thinking, old relationships, old alliances, old technologies, old theories, and most important, old leadership will not serve us well in an era of global networks and rapid change. Our expert speaker for today's program will make that very clear to us. It is my pleasure to introduce Tom Hinton. Tom works with clients that want to create successful leaders and build a reputation for excellence through customer service. Tom is president and CEO of the San Diego-based Customer Relations Institute, an international training and consulting firm that specializes in helping its clients improve their business performance through leadership, teamwork, and superior customer service. As a professional speaker, he has addressed over 500 corporate, association, and government audiences in the United States, Canada, Japan, Mexico, Scotland, and England. Tom's most popular topics are customer service, leadership and team building, and achieving performance excellence in the workplace. He has written 31 published articles for publications such as San Diego Business Journal, the Los Angeles Business Journal, Quality Digest, and California Quality. Mr. Hinton is the author of 2 books, The Spirit of Service and Leadership Lessons I Learned on the Links, 72 Ways to Power the Course of Business and Life. He is the co-author of Customer-Focused Quality, What to Do on Monday Morning. Tom is a graduate of the University of Maryland. Welcome, Tom. And let me ask a question before we begin the first segment. What exactly is thinking out of the box?
Well, Peter, I think thinking outside the box is a calculated strategy, first of all, that companies and teams use to stimulate the creative thinking process of their employees and teams in order to improve products, expand services, streamline their work processes, and really solve difficult problems. Thinking outside the box can only happen in a visionary organization. What I mean by that is an organization that has an innovative spirit and values that encourage its people to think freely and express contradictory ideas that challenge the status quo. And you know, when an organization has that level of commitment from its senior leadership and roots that level of innovation and thinking in its everyday culture, I can guarantee you that the organization will be a market leader because its employees and even its customers constantly create new products and services. So that's how I would define thinking outside of the box.
And how does a leader in a corporation achieve that? How do they change the culture that permeates their organization?
Well, I think there are 3 things, Peter. I think, first of all, a leader has to have the courage to define a vision that excites the employees, that inspires them to raise the bar of their performance. Otherwise, an organization becomes very content and exists in what I refer to as that velvet rut. I think, secondly, leadership is responsible for values, and a couple of the values that are very important are innovation, and I think also open dialogue, because if we can have an open dialogue, my ideas are valued as your ideas are valued. And I think the last thing is that ultimately leaders want to create a culture of free thinking and new ideas, because as you said in your opening monologue, it's very important not to get tied to the old ways of doing things. There was an American humorist by the name of Will Rogers. I'm sure you might remember some of Will Rogers'
Yes, indeed.
Great humor. And Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, if you're standing still, you're going to get run over. And that's how leaders stimulate thinking outside the box.
Thanks, Tom. Very interesting. Let's begin with Module 1, where we discuss principles of creative leadership.
Thank you very much for attending this program on leadership. It's always a pleasure for me to return to the International Training Center here at San Diego State University as a special guest of Dr. Miguel Cardenas, the ITC's distinguished executive director, who has demonstrated year after year what can be accomplished by a leader who thinks outside the box. So thank you for inviting me and welcome to today's program. I'd like to begin by challenging your creative brain through an exercise. It's an exercise I'd like you to do on your own for just a minute without asking the help of anyone next to you or looking at the object you're about to draw. Are you ready? Okay. Here's your assignment. I'd like you to draw the front and back of the smallest coin in your monetary system. In the United States, our smallest common coin is a penny. In Mexico, the smallest common coin might be a peso. In Brazil, it might be a real cruzado, and so on. But whatever your smallest coin is, please draw the front and back of it as best you can without reaching into your pocket to look at the coin. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do this exercise. So go ahead and start drawing right now. Thank you. Now take a moment to compare your drawing to the person sitting next to you. How well did you capture the features and inscriptions on the coin? Now take a moment to reach into your pocket and find a coin that resembles the coin you just drew. How well did you capture the features and inscriptions of the coin? Isn't it interesting that something we see and touch every day and use many times throughout the day can be so difficult to remember in detail and then draw a picture of it? And yet, I think leadership by thinking outside the box is just as difficult as drawing this small coin. It's difficult because most of the things we do as managers don't require us to be very creative. And most of the problems we encounter on a daily basis don't challenge us to think outside the box. In fact, most of the decisions and actions we perform as managers are done with little or no strategic thinking at all. Mostly, we find ourselves performing task-driven activities centered around organizing and staffing. This statement isn't meant as criticism of managers, but rather it's a reflection of the difference between leaders and managers. As Professor John Cotter suggests, managers ensure planned accomplishment by controlling and problem solving. This requires very little creative process. In my interviews and meetings with more than 125 leaders over the past 3 years, I've come to the conclusion that the art of leadership is very different than the act of managing. And furthermore, creative leadership often requires us to use our minds and leadership abilities in ways we haven't tried before. So this morning, we're going to discuss leadership by thinking outside the box. And in the context of that topic, I'd like to discuss the following subjects with you. First, I'd like to talk about leadership and how I define it. I'd also like to discuss the world in which leaders must lead, because our world is a very different place than it was 5 or even 10 years ago. Many things have changed. Next, I'd like to discuss the topic of thinking and the thought processes leaders use to make decisions. And finally, we'll explore how leaders think in a creative context in order to arrive at better decisions and better results. So let's talk about leadership in the new millennium. Let's begin by analyzing the factors and conditions that impact leadership in our world today. I think this is important because factors and conditions that exist today will determine to a large extent how creative we will be as leaders in the next 10 to 20 years. When we consider the factors and conditions that affect leadership, there are 2 critical questions we must ask. And these questions certainly relate to leadership in the 3rd millennium. The first question is this: what kind of world are leaders stepping into in this new millennium? And secondly, what are the emerging trends and challenges confronting leaders as we enter the 21st century. From my perspective, the world into which leaders are stepping is the most fascinating time in 2,000 years. It is a relatively peaceful time around the world. It is also a time of global expansion. It's a time when people are the decisive factor when it comes to productivity and quality. This era is a time of connectedness, a time when most nations can participate in the benefits of the World Wide Web to obtain information and seek knowledge. It's a time when leaders will have not one bottom line to manage, but three. They are a company's financial performance, our own human performance, and the quality of life performance. And finally, I see this era as a time when the creative minds of leaders from many countries, not just the superpowers, but many countries, will be unleashed around the world. And hopefully, all the people of the world will be able to enjoy the benefits of a prosperous world economy as a result of their combined creative genius and problem-solving skills. When you consider the fact that through the power of technology and a global internet, scientists, educators, medical researchers, and business leaders are now able to communicate at the speed of a keyboard. And furthermore, that national borders will become less significant because of the free exchange of data and information and knowledge and wisdom across time and space via the internet. We could very well see in our lifetime a major transformation from poverty, ignorance, illiteracy, and sickness throughout the third world countries. The knowledge age we have just entered has the potential to foster a global society that can cure most illnesses and educate and feed anyone within the reach of a computer and the internet. And so I think this new millennium, and more specifically this decade, will prove to be the most exciting period ever for leaders. Many decisions must be made, and new products and services will abound as the world becomes one international community, dependent on each other for growth and for trade and prosperity. There will be little tolerance for wars or violence and the suppression of freedom. But let's consider my second question for a moment. There are four trends that are shaping our political and economic landscape. And these four trends have global implications, especially throughout our two hemispheres. They are, number one, rapid technological change. Number two, expanding globalization. Number three, the dramatic shift in demographics. And number four, a complex value shift. Let's examine what each of these four trends means to the third millennium leader. The rapid rise of technological advancements over the past 10 years has given way to a new era. We know this era as the knowledge age. The knowledge age is transforming the way we do business around the world. While this pronouncement is not front-page headline news to most of us, the rapid speed at which technological advancements are being introduced to consumers is causing leaders to rethink the structure of their companies and how they market to new customers while trying to maintain their existing customers. It's also causing politicians to rethink how they build their political base, expand their constituencies, and get votes to stay in power. Consider this perspective. Dick Lyles, the Chief Opportunity Officer at the Ken Blanchard Company, says, "The world in which we live is less than 12 years old." Mr. Lyle contends, and I agree, that our world actually began on November 9th, 1989. For that is the date when the Berlin Wall came crumbling down and communism, as we knew it then, collapsed. This historical event transformed the way the world works. Within a very short period of time, following the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the decline of communism, our world became a global market. Knowledge and technology, for the first time, transcended international borders at the click of a mouse. Even China's communist regime had to open its eyes to the potential power of technology and the exchange of information via the World Wide Web. As more and more Chinese discovered the power of the computer and the internet, alternative viewpoints started to emerge. Suddenly, there was a steady stream of unbiased and uncensored news and information that inspired thousands and thousands of Chinese to consider alternative ways to govern and even live. For the first time in 60 years, the Chinese Communist government came under public criticism. All of this culminated in the bloody uprising at Tiananmen Square when the Chinese government was forced to stop the knowledge revolution taking place, and they stopped it with bullets and guns and tanks. While many students and freedom-loving Chinese lost their lives at Tiananmen Square, it marked a significant shift in how people will fight injustice and other social evils. With the end of the Cold War, the former Soviet Union countries and the United States were able to make the transition from mobilization to globalization. We went from the hotline to the World Wide Web, and from missiles to modems. Within 3 years of the Berlin Wall crumbling, most democratic governments and corporations made the transition from hierarchies to networks. And suddenly, today, the world has changed its image from a World Federation wrestling match to a 100-yard dash. That's the kind of race we're in. The only difference is that our competition in the 100-yard dash is always changing. As Dick Lyles of the Blanchard Company suggests, today in our global world, everyone's connected, but nobody's in charge. Within 5 years, if we so desire, you and I will be connected worldwide, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. In fact, according to Dr. Larry Smarr at the University of California at San Diego, in their technology center, within 3 years, we will have the ability to do everything we do now on a computerized cell phone smaller than this one right here in my hand. So get ready for a whole new world, because this is where rapid technology change is taking us. Expanding globalization, the second trend, is also transforming how we do business and live our lives. Traditional competitors are no longer the enemy. In fact, companies like IBM have coined a new term to define a former competitor that is now part of IBM's alliance. The term is frenemy, which is a combination of the word friend and enemy. As IBM sees it, any company that can help them improve their revenue, people, or quality performance should be considered a friend and not the enemy. In a time of expanding globalization, companies have placed a premium on human talent. Within the past 5 years, there has been a dramatic shift in terms of the value of companies and what they place on human talent. Today, the best-in-class companies believe your people are your organization, and everything else is an asset. Furthermore, if we've learned anything by studying the winners of the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award and the equivalent to the Baldrige Award in other countries, we should have learned that people are the decisive factor when it comes to productivity. Another factor shaping our world is the dramatic shift in demographics. This is our third factor. Consider the aging of the baby boomer generation. Unlike previous generations, you and I don't have any intention of quitting our jobs anytime soon. According to the United States Census reports and related surveys, the baby boomer generation, which comprises more than 1 billion people around the world between the ages of 45 and 65 years old, we are extending our work age. In other words, we have no intention of retiring. Now, this creates an awkward phenomena for the generations X and Y age groups that had every intention of taking our jobs as they graduated from college. However, the problem is we're not surrendering our positions. We're not retiring. We're staying on the job well into our 60s and possibly even our 70s. And all of this has had an impact on politics and how we govern. Quoting Dick Lyles once again, he says, "We don't elect leaders anymore, we elect survivors." You need only look at the recent American election in the state of Florida to realize how true this statement is. Elections have become survival of the fittest. The next ITC video conference will elaborate on this important topic. How does all of this impact you as the leader? I think it has caused a shift in our values. You see, for the first time in many decades, we are very concerned about the worth of our life and our significance. We are a generation that has discovered that life has more to do with significance than it does with just being a success in the eyes of others. And so, I think you and I, the leaders of this new millennium, we're experiencing an awakening of the mind as well as an awakening of our souls. And given the challenges we will face in this decade of destiny, I believe it is very important for us to learn how to be leaders first, and then how to use our creative talents and powers to transform this world for the betterment of all mankind. Let's talk about the art of leadership. I define leadership as the ability to help individuals and organizations surpass themselves. The key word in my definition is surpass, because first and foremost, a leader's job is to inspire people and the organization they work for to improve their performance and results. And there is no one particular leadership style or personality profile that necessarily works better than another. I think it's fair to say that there are as many different approaches to successful leadership as there are leaders.